The day I walked into Crestwood Elite Academy wearing a second-hand jacket, a boy laughed so hard he spilled his coffee. He made sure the entire hallway heard him. He called me a charity case. He said someone must have handed me a scholarship out of pity. What he didn't know, what absolutely nobody in that building knew, was that I had signed the deed to his school 2 weeks earlier, and I was just getting started. If that kind of story is what you live for, you're in the right place. Hit that like button right now before we go any further, and subscribe if you're new here, because every story on this channel is one you will not find anywhere else. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. My name is Claire. I was 19 years old when I enrolled at Crestwood Elite Academy, and I did it on purpose. Not because I needed the education, not because I was chasing some teenage experience I'd missed out on. I did it because my mother had built something inside those walls, something she poured her heart into for over a decade, and 6 months after her death, I needed to see it with my own eyes. My mother, Diane, wasn't born into money. She built everything herself, starting with a single boutique hotel in a mid-sized city when she was 26 years old. By the time she passed, the Whitmore Group, our family's holding company, controlled 14 hotel properties, a real estate portfolio spanning 3 countries, and several institutional investments, one of which was Crestwood Elite Academy. She had purchased the school quietly, through the holding company, 3 years before she got sick. She never told anyone outside of her legal team. She believed in anonymous giving. She believed that the moment you put your name on something, you change your reason for doing it. She left everything to me. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office the morning after the funeral, surrounded by documents I barely understood, and thinking, what do I do with all of this? Her board of directors wanted me to stay quiet, stay invisible, let them manage things. And for 5 months, I did exactly that. I attended meetings by phone, I signed documents my legal team explained to me line by line, I stayed in the background like a ghost wearing my mother's name. But then I found out something that made me walk into Crestwood's enrollment office and sign up as a regular student under my own name. Nobody connected Claire Whitmore to the Whitmore Group. The school's administration had only ever dealt with lawyers and holding company representatives. To them, I was just a new student with a simple application and an unremarkable address. I kept it that way deliberately. I showed up on my first day in an old olive green jacket my mother had bought from a thrift store years ago. She used to wear it on weekends when she didn't want to be recognized. I wore it because it still smelled faintly like her. I wasn't trying to look poor. I wasn't performing anything. I was just a grieving girl wearing her dead mother's jacket, walking into a school her mother owned, hoping to feel something close to her. I didn't expect what happened next. Crestwood was exactly what you'd imagine a school for wealthy families to look like. Marble floors, a courtyard with actual fountains, students whose backpacks cost more than some people's monthly rent. I walked through those halls with my plain canvas bag and my second-hand jacket, and I felt every single stare. I had made it maybe 40 feet inside when I heard the laughter. His name was Dorian Ashworth. I didn't know that yet. I learned it later, but I noticed him immediately because he had the kind of presence that fills a room whether you want it to or not. Tall, effortlessly dressed, surrounded by 4 or 5 people who laughed at everything he said half a second before it was actually funny. He was holding a coffee cup when he spotted me, and I watched his expression shift from boredom to amusement in real time. He said it loud enough for the whole hallway to hear. He asked his friends if the school had started a charity drive because it looked like someone had dropped off a donation in the wrong place. He looked directly at me when he said it. His friends laughed on cue. A few other students nearby smiled, even though they didn't know me, because that's what you do when the most powerful person in the hallway decides something is funny. I stopped walking. I looked at him, not with anger. I genuinely wasn't angry, not yet. Just with this steady, quiet attention, like I was memorizing his face for a reason I hadn't figured out yet. He held eye contact for a second, and something in his expression flickered, just for a moment. Then he smirked and turned away. I kept walking. What I didn't say out loud, what I only told myself in the privacy of my own head as I found my first class, was that I had seen the name Ashworth on a document just 6 days earlier. Gerald Ashworth, Dorian's father, had submitted a formal proposal to Crestwood's board of directors. He wanted to redirect the school's scholarship fund budget towards a new luxury events wing. The wing, conveniently, would use his hotel group's catering and hospitality services exclusively. It was dressed up in the language of school improvement and student experience, but it was a business deal wearing an education costume. My mother had built that scholarship program personally. It funded 32 students every single year. It was the thing she was most proud of in her entire portfolio. She left everything to me. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office the morning after the funeral, surrounded by documents I barely understood, and thinking, what do I do with all of this? Her board of directors wanted me to stay quiet, stay invisible, let them manage things. And for 5 months, I did exactly that. I attended meetings by phone, I signed documents my legal team explained to me line by line. I stayed in the background like a ghost wearing my mother's name. But then I found out something that made me walk into Crestwood's enrollment office and sign up as a regular student under my own name. Nobody connected Claire Whitmore to the Whitmore Group. The school's administration had only ever dealt with lawyers and holding company representatives. To them, I was just a new student with a simple application and an unremarkable address. I kept it that way deliberately. I showed up on my first day in an old olive green jacket my mother had bought from a thrift store years ago. She used to wear it on weekends when she didn't want to be recognized. I wore it because it still smelled faintly like her. I wasn't trying to look poor. I wasn't performing anything. I was just a grieving girl wearing her dead mother's jacket, walking into a school her mother owned, hoping to feel something close to her. I didn't expect what happened next.
In the days that followed, I watched Crestwood the way my mother taught me to watch any operation, carefully, without revealing what you're looking for. I went to class, I took notes, I ate lunch with a girl named Petra who sat down next to me on my second day without being invited, stole one of my crackers, and announced that she had decided we were friends. I didn't argue. Petra was sharp and funny and had a way of seeing through people that I found immediately refreshing. She never asked me where I was from or why I dressed the way I did. She just talked to me like I was already worth knowing. Dorian, meanwhile, had decided I was entertainment. He didn't confront me physically or do anything overtly cruel at first. It was subtler than that, which somehow made it worse. He started a rumor that I had submitted fraudulent enrollment documents. He told people I was on a hardship waiver, said it with just enough mockery that it became a joke rather than a fact. In the cafeteria, in the hallways, I would catch people glancing at me and whispering, and I knew what they were saying. I had become a story he was telling for his own amusement. Most nights I went home to my mother's estate, made myself dinner, and sat in her study reading through financial reports and board minutes. The contrast between my two lives was so extreme that it sometimes felt like a fever dream. During the day, I was the girl people whispered about in the cafeteria. At night, I was reviewing lease agreements and property valuations for a portfolio worth more than most of Crestwood's families combined. I didn't tell anyone, not even Petra. Then came the board meeting that changed everything. My legal team forwarded me the official agenda. Gerald Ashworth had escalated his proposal. He was pushing hard, calling in favors, and he had enough board allies to potentially push the vote through. I had every right as the principal shareholder to attend and vote, so I did. I went as a representative of the Whitmore Holding Company. I wore a blazer, pulled my hair back, and sat at the end of a long conference table surrounded by people who had no idea they were looking at a 19-year-old girl who owned the building they were sitting in. Gerald presented his case confidently. He was polished and persuasive, the kind of man who had spent decades making bad ideas sound reasonable. When the vote came, I voted against it, alone. One vote, but it was the controlling vote, and everyone in that room knew it. The proposal failed. Gerald's face went through several colors. He demanded to know the identity of the Whitmore representative. My lawyer calmly stated that the representative was not required to disclose personal information beyond their authority to vote. I gathered my folder, stood up, and walked out of the room without saying a single word. I was back at school the next morning in my olive green jacket. What I didn't know was that Gerald went home that night and told Dorian every detail of what had happened, and Dorian, sharper than I had given him credit for, started paying very close attention to the new girl at school who didn't fit. About 3 weeks into my enrollment, Dorian did something that crossed a line I hadn't expected him to cross. He arranged through connections on the student council for my name to be added to the agenda of the school's monthly assembly under a segment called the Scholarship Spotlight. The segment was real. It existed to celebrate scholarship students. But I wasn't a scholarship student, and he knew that. The intent was to put me on a stage in front of the entire school and let the humiliation land in the biggest possible room. Petra found out 20 minutes before it happened. She came sprinting to find me in the East Corridor, grabbed my arm, and told me everything in one breathless sentence. I stood there and let the information settle. Then I straightened my jacket and walked toward the auditorium. When my name was called, I walked onto that stage and stood at the microphone. I could see Dorian in the third row, watching with the controlled expression of someone waiting for a punchline. I looked out at the auditorium full of students, and I thought about my mother. I thought about what she would do standing exactly where I was standing. I started talking. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I spoke calmly about my mother, without using her name, without revealing anything identifying, just a woman I admired deeply, who believed that the most important thing any institution could do was make space for people who the world had decided didn't belong. I talked about what it cost a person to walk into a room where everyone expected them to fail. I talked about dignity, how it wasn't something other people could give you, and it wasn't something they could take either, no matter how loud they laughed or how many rumors they spread. The auditorium was completely quiet by the time I finished. I stepped off the stage and walked back to my seat. I didn't look at Dorian, but Petra told me afterward that he hadn't looked away from me once. That same week, Gerald Ashworth received an official letter from the Whitmore Holding Company. It informed him that the lease on the land beneath his flagship hotel property, a lease his own father had signed 40 years ago and which quietly transferred to Whitmore Group through a real estate acquisition 7 years prior, was coming up for renewal and had been placed under formal review. No decision had been made, but the review had begun. Gerald called every contact he had. Nobody could tell him who was making the decision. The holding company's structure was layered and private, exactly the way my mother had designed. He was trying to negotiate with a wall. And then Dorian found a photograph.
It was in an old industry profile piece from a hospitality trade publication, a feature on Diane Whitmore published 8 years earlier. There was a photograph of my mother at a groundbreaking ceremony, and standing beside her, maybe 11 years old, was a girl in a plain dress who looked unmistakably like the girl sitting 3 rows behind him in literature class. Petra told me later that she watched the color drain from his face. He found me in the library 2 days later. It was late afternoon and most students had already left. He sat down across from me without asking, which I noticed. Even then, he didn't ask for permission to enter a space. Old habits. But his posture was different. The confidence was still there, but it was quieter now, sitting underneath something that looked a lot like the beginning of genuine understanding. He put the photograph on the table between us. He asked me, quietly, if I was who he thought I was. I closed my book. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I told him everything. Not to hurt him, I want to be clear about that, because I think it would be easy to assume that the satisfaction of revealing myself was the whole point. It wasn't. I told him because he asked directly, and I had spent enough time being invisible. I told him about my mother and what she built. I told him about the scholarship program, 32 students every year, because she believed that talent didn't care what neighborhood you grew up in.
I told him that I had been in the room when his father tried to dismantle it. I told him that I had voted it down. I told him that the woman he saw in that photograph wore a jacket very similar to the one he had laughed at in the hallway, and that I had worn it on my first day here because she wasn't alive to wear it anymore. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, he didn't make excuses. He didn't try to explain his behavior away or reframe it as something smaller than it was. He just said that he had been wrong and that he was sorry. It was simple. It was real. And honestly, it was more than I had expected from him. I told him what was going to happen next. I called a formal board meeting and I showed up as myself for the first time, Claire Whitmore, principal shareholder of the Whitmore Group, owner of Crestwood Elite Academy. I watched the faces in that room recalibrate in real time. Gerald Ashworth was seated 3 chairs down from me. He looked like a man trying to remember every conversation he had ever had in that building. I reinstated the scholarship program at full funding and expanded it. 32 students became 50. I announced a new endowment in my mother's name to keep it funded permanently, independent of any board decision going forward. Gerald's catering and events contracts were reviewed and terminated based on conflict of interest. His lease renewal was approved. I wasn't interested in destroying his business, but it was renegotiated at current fair market rates, which were significantly higher than what his father had locked in 40 years ago. His legal team had 3 weeks to review and sign. I didn't expel Dorian. I had never wanted to. Cruelty answered with cruelty doesn't build anything. But I did require, as a condition of his continued enrollment, that he issue a formal apology to each of the scholarship students he had publicly mocked during his time at Crestwood. Not a group statement, individual ones, written by hand. He did it, every single one. I know because 3 of those students came to find me afterward to say thank you, not for the apology itself, but for the fact that someone had finally decided their dignity was worth protecting. I stayed at Crestwood for the rest of that year. I went to class, I had lunch with Petra, I sat in Mr. Calloway's literature class and argued about books with people who had stopped whispering about my jacket. Some days it was almost normal. I still wore the olive green jacket. I'll probably wear it for the rest of my life. My mother used to say that you should never let someone else decide what your presence is worth. I understood the words when she said them. I only truly understood the meaning when I stood in that hallway at 19 years old, watching a boy with a coffee cup try to make me feel small and felt absolutely nothing shift inside me. Because I already knew who I was. I just had to wait for the right moment to let him find out. She built something that was supposed to outlast her. It did, and it will keep outlasting her for every student who walks through those doors believing they belong there, because now no one can take that away. The boy who laughed at my second-hand jacket learned something that year that no classroom had ever taught him. That silence, when you know exactly who you are, is the loudest power in any room. If this story reached something in you, please give it a like right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this one. Share it with someone in your life who has ever been underestimated. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because we tell stories here that you will not find anywhere else, every single week. I will see you in the next one.